Record of Fugitives, May 1856, from the papers of Sidney Howard Gay. Read by Frank Blissett. May 14th. A party of 4 arrived from Philadelphia. It was headed by Captain Harriet Tubman, the subordinates being Benjamin Jackson and Jason Coleman, who belonged to Henry Wright of Dorchester County, Maryland, William A. Conaway, Laban Hudson Master, and Henry Hopkins, John Houston Master, of the same neighborhood. They are all young men of an aggregate market value probably of $6,000. Harriet Tubman, 7 years ago, was the slave of Edward Broadhurst of Bucktown, Maryland. Her master dying, the estate to be settled, and 2 of her sisters having been sold into a chain gang, she determined to run away. She did so, and made her way to Canada. In a few months, however, she concluded to return. She went back and sought concealment in the house of a friend who had first advised her escape. She made her arrival known to her friends and her purpose, which was to lead them out of Egypt. She had 4 brothers and 2 sisters and their children, then slaves, to her old mistress. She could only accomplish the release of 1 child, who was 7 years old, and whom she hired a man to carry. She took this to Canada. After again earning money at service, the following year she returned a second time for this child's mother. This woman, from a dread of being sold, had run away from her mistress, and for 18 months had been in concealment, occasionally with a friend, once anchored off in a boat, in the river, for a day or 2, but nearly the whole time in the woods. Harriet got messages to her, and hired a man, the necessary arrangements being made, to take her in a boat from Cambridge to Baltimore. There Harriet joined her, and they were obliged to remain there for several weeks during the sisters' confinement and recovery. When the child was 5 weeks old, she induced a free colored man to take her to Philadelphia as his brother's wife, who was known to be free. A friendly white man, who did not know that she was not the brother's wife, having given the necessary bonds. Harriet went on the day before, and took the sister and child to Canada, to the child she had rescued before. There the husband and father, who was free, soon after joined them. The spring following she returned a 3rd time. Her 4 brothers had been fugitives all winter in the woods to escape the dreaded chain gang. The 3 eldest, however, had come in at the solicitation of a lumberman, to whom their services were important, and who had hired them before, and who had agreed to hire them again for 1 year, thus securing them from being sold before the next Christmas. The youngest, however, was not included in this arrangement, and remained in the woods, though badly frostbitten. Harriet, from her own place of concealment, entered into communication with him, and brought him off. At camp meeting time, the following summer, she again went back, and went, as before, into concealment. She had interviews with the 3 brothers, but they all refused to leave the man who had been so kind to them, and at his own risk of loss, by hiring their time, put off the day of sale. To leave him then would have been a loss to him of the wages of their unexpired service. She did not, however, come away empty-handed, but brought off a young man in the neighborhood, who, hearing of her, proposed to escape with her. At Christmas she returned again for her brothers. Their term of service with the lumberman had expired. At Christmas they were to have been sold. On Christmas Eve, 1854, she and they left for Canada, where they soon after arrived safely. There still remained behind one sister and her 2 children, and the old father of the family, who, however, being free, can leave as he pleases, but will not so long as any of his children remain in bondage in Maryland. Harriet's errand at this time was to bring off her sister and the 2 children. She found it, however, impracticable. But the attempt is only postponed, not abandoned. Still, her mission this time is not without good fruit. The mother of the young man whom she took away on a former visit when she was unsuccessful in getting her brothers, informed the 4 young men who were with her today that she had come back. They made the necessary arrangements, and a fortnight ago, on Saturday, the 5 started, Harriet leading the company. They traveled by night and on foot to Newcastle, Delaware. On the way there, they learned that the hue and cry was after them. Along the railway, at all the stations, and at roadside taverns, bills were posted describing the 4 men and offering a reward of $1,200 for their capture. But for Harriet they would, without doubt, have been taken. She led them safely to Newcastle. There she took them to the house of a colored woman, and for 1 week they lay concealed there in a potato hole. Braving detection for herself, she went backward and forward between Newcastle and Wilmington on the cars to get friends to carry her company further. The risk was manifestly too great. They had to remain quiet. When she had no longer 20 cents to pay her passage, she walked, and at last a friend consented to go for them. They were sent to Wilmington at night, and then into Pennsylvania, at last here. Harriet is, by profession, a cook, and when at service earns from $15 to $16 per month. She has lived in New York and Philadelphia, and would have remained in one or the other place now, only that feeling bound to get her sister and her children next camp meeting time, and thinking it may cost a good deal, she wishes to be with her brothers to secure their pecuniary aid when the time comes for her to start again. Sent them all to Syracuse, and food, $21. May 15th. Bill Henry Mason, James Hurst, master, from near Georgetown Roads, Maryland, and William Chambers, George Meadows, master, from same neighborhood, left home with 3 others. Walked to Mount Pleasant and took the cars, were questioned but not stopped. Went then to Wilmington, and thence to Philadelphia, and were forwarded by Still. Sent to Albany, $5. May 16th. Winnie Patsy, with her daughter, about 3½ years of age, arrived from Philadelphia. Her master was Jacob Schuster, from Norfolk, Virginia. Last fall her husband escaped by vessel for Wilmington, and engaged the captain to bring the wife and child the next trip. He belonged to another man, who warned Winnie's master that she would probably follow him. His master came in one day with a man whom she had reason to suppose was a speculator, and she was sure that she was sold. They had no sooner left the room than she seized the child and fled to a house in the suburbs where she was told she would find refuge. Beneath this house, which was apparently without cellar, a place a few feet square had been excavated by the slave who lived there for the concealment of fugitives. It was entered by a trap-door covered by a piece of carpet, on which stood a bedstead. It had no window and no means of light or ventilation except by the trap-door. Into this the mother and child were put, and that has been their home for the last 5 months. When there were no persons about, they were permitted to come out for a little while, but they slept there always, and sometimes remained there for days together. She was fed, she says, at the expense of a society among the slaves, organized to aid persons in her circumstances. At last the captain of the Wilmington schooner returned, and she, with the child, were put on board the vessel. They arrived in Wilmington on Saturday last. Her husband is in New Bedford. Forwarded, $4. Samuel Davis and Henry Saunders belonged to James Houston, near Georgetown Roads. William Thomas, Master John Armstrong, are the 3 who started with Mason and Chambers, see May 15th. Jesse Slackerm, Master Arthur Bridget, Eastern Shore of Maryland, has been hired out for 2 years on a vessel running to Philadelphia, 18 years old. Sent to Albany, $8. May 26th. Harriet Eglin, alias Mary Brown, of Baltimore, John DeLahaye, dry foods merchant, owner. His brother died in Mexico and bequeathed her to John, but the will was disputed, and she was to be sold to settle the dispute. She preferred, however, to take another way to reconcile the difference. Charlotte Giles, alias Mary Johnson, belonged to William Applegarth of Baltimore, who bought her at auction, her former owners having died. She was well treated, except she was allowed to have no beau, which was the drop too much in her cup, and she determined to assert her right to the pursuit of happiness. She also heard her mistress say that she did not care what the devil became of her, Charlotte, after her death, which confirmed her resolution. She and Harriet are cousins and were near neighbors. They intended to leave at Christmas, but the cold prevented. When they did come, they borrowed $5 on the credit of Charlotte's mistress. A colored woman living near the depot passed them as her nieces into the hands of a white man who bought them tickets to Little York. A Mr. Gray sent them on to Columbia to William Whipper, who forwarded them to Still at Philadelphia. Sent to Syracuse, $8.55. May 28th. Robert Smith, now Isaac Handy, from Baltimore, owned by Mrs. Thomas A. Spencer at Snow Hill, Worcester County, Maryland. Hired out to her brother, N. N. Norris. Charles Henry Ringgold and John Henry Richards, both slaves of James Hodges of Baltimore. 3 persons to Syracuse, $12.50. That was Record of Fugitives, May 1856, from the papers of Sidney Howard Gay. Read by Frank Blissett.